We have to be clear that we stand foursquare behind efforts to stop China bullying other people, or to stop Russia, on the other hand, bullying other people. But I think we have to be honest and clear in our approach to China. We have to recognize, for example, that when China does things which are wrong, we'll stand up to them and make it clear, make it plain, and that we won't assume when we sign an agreement with China that they will go along with it.
Chris Patten, Lord Patten, was the last governor of Hong Kong from 1992 to 1997. In fact, he's been in charge of just about everything in the British establishment. He was a former chair of the Conservative Party, former chair of the BBC, and he's the outgoing Chancellor of Oxford University. Good morning, good afternoon to you, Chris Patten.
Good morning. I've never been captain of the England cricket team, which is a failing on the part of the selectors.
Yeah, I think so. They overlooked you. I don't know why. What about China, though? How big a threat do you think it is? And do you think our government, or indeed our opposition, are really squaring it up to it in the way they should?
Well, what's interesting is we've talked a lot about having a strategy on China, but we've been rather poor in actually setting out what it is, either in public, and I'm not sure how much has been done in private. China has been called by both the MI6, MI5, and by the Parliamentary Intelligence Committee a threat. And we can see that in all sorts of ways, not least cyber security, but it does threaten our interests and our values. On the other hand, we have to find ways of getting on with China, recognizing its economic position in the world, though it's getting much weaker at the moment, and recognizing that it's important that we have a dialogue with China when it comes to dealing with big global problems. Though we have to recognize in doing that the Chinese invariably break their word. So we can't behave as though China doesn't matter, but we shouldn't be delusional about China and think you can only get on with China if you accept that China has what used to be called the mandate of heaven. China is a threat, but it's one we have to get on with. And we shouldn't... Go on.
How could we harden our approach? Obviously, one approach that Donald Trump's talking about is tariffs, but should we actually just say there are certain areas where we're not going to do business with China over?
Well, the first thing we should do is to talk about China as we would about other countries, and point out when it's breaking international agreement which it's made, point out that some of its claims for a special relationship with us are delusional. People talk about China and trade with China as though the only way we can do business with China is if we accept China's political narrative. And that's rubbish. And the Chinese buy more from us than we buy. The Chinese have a balance of payments surplus with us most years. The Chinese need to have, not as much as we perhaps export, but need to have some sort of relationship with us. And we shouldn't allow people to persuade us that we can't do business with China unless we do it on our knees. That's rubbish. And we should do business with China on exactly the same basis as we do with other people.
You issued warnings, I remember them well, at the time of the handback of Hong Kong, most of which have actually turned out to be true in spite of the guarantees given then. Do you feel that in the next few years we are going to see China attempting to take over Taiwan?
Well, it may well do that. And we have to be clear that we stand foursquare behind efforts to stop China bullying other people, or to stop Russia, on the other hand, bullying other people. But I think we have to be honest and clear in our approach to China. We have to recognize, for example, that when China does things which are wrong, we'll stand up to them and make it clear, make it plain, and that we won't assume when we sign an agreement with China that they will go along with it. There is one other thing which I think is imperative. We shouldn't allow our sense of human rights in dealing with China to be diminished. There's at present a British citizen in China, Jimmy Lai. He's in China because he's in prison because he ran a newspaper. He's been in prison for about 1,000 days in solitary confinement. He's not even allowed, I say this partly because it's a Sunday, to receive Holy Communion as a Catholic. There are about 10 journalists in prison. There are about 30 being prosecuted under a national security law. Those are issues that we should talk up about. Those are issues which we should tell China we simply don't accept.
Are you hearing what you'd like on China from any of the four candidates for the leadership of your party?
Well, if I'm absolutely honest, I haven't heard very much on anything from any of them recently. And I sort of think that Anthony Seldon might have been a bit unfair when he talked about them in the newspaper, in the Sunday Times this morning, when he described them as not being exactly giants. But I would hope that Tom Tugendhat, and I must be careful not to praise anybody because it might destroy their chances. I think both Tom Tugendhat and James Cleverly have in the past said one or two things which suggested they understood that China isn't always a friendly face, and that while we should try to get on with China, we have to do so without sacrificing our values or our sense of what's happening in the world. There used to be a view that because China was becoming more economically powerful, though that's now started to slow, and technological change changed, it would become a political democracy.
Are you backing any of them? Are you giving any of them your endorsement?
No, I think if I was to do that, it would probably completely scupper their chances. I think that Tom Tugendhat in the past has shown a sensible grip of issues, and particularly about foreign policy. But he had a bit of a wobble the other day about the European Convention on Human Rights, which I think he's been trying to recover. What all of them have got to recognise is that the route back for the Chinese, for the Conservative Party, lies through the middle ground and doesn't lie in trying to ape Farage. We must recognise that we should stick to traditional conservative values, which have served us rather well for the last 100 years. But now, almost the most depressing statistics about the Conservative Party are the very small number of younger people who identify as conservatives. They're the voters for the future. And when you see that I think only 8% of the youngest people canvassed or asked for their opinions were prepared to identify themselves with conservatives, it's pretty depressing. And there's a lot of work to do, whoever becomes the leader of the Conservative Party.
Chris Patten, we look forward to you leading the team out at Lord's. Thank you very much indeed.